At my son's wedding, while the crowd cheered and celebrated love, I stood silently with a secret worth more than anyone could imagine. $25 million. 2 years earlier, when my wife passed away, she left me with a fortune that could change lives forever. Yet, on the day my only son said I do, I chose not to reveal it. Guests whispered, "What gift will the father give? A house? Money? Something extraordinary?" But I only smiled and raised my glass. Why keep silent? Because wealth can test the purest of hearts. I wanted to know if my son's marriage was built on genuine love, or if it would crumble in the shadow of unimaginable fortune. As I watched him dance with his bride, laughing without a clue of the inheritance hidden in my hands, I realized my silence wasn't just a choice. It was the greatest test of their future. This is the story of how $25 million love and silence changed everything. Life has a strange way of weaving stories. Threads of love, loss, silence, and secrets that can stretch across decades. Mine began long before my son ever walked down the aisle with his bride. It began with a woman I loved more than life itself, my wife. She was the heart of our family, the one who carried not only my dreams, but also the foundation of my son's future. And when she left this world, she carried with her both an immeasurable absence and an unimaginable gift, a fortune worth $25 million. The woman behind the fortune. My wife was not born into riches, nor did she seek them. She was a woman of quiet dignity, raised in a modest home where kindness was worth more than gold. Yet life, in its unpredictable generosity, blessed her with both business acumen and an iron will. Together, we built a life, but it was she who truly carved the empire that would later be called a fortune. Her ventures in real estate, her instinct for investments, her relentless belief in growth, all of these turned a modest savings into something extraordinary. I was always there, a partner, but even I knew the brilliance was hers. But what she left behind was not simply money. It was a philosophy, a warning, and a wish. The philosophy of wealth. On the surface, $25 million is just a number. To some, it is security. To others, it is temptation. My wife understood this better than anyone. She had seen wealth break families apart, tear siblings into rivals, turn love into greed. She often told me, "Money, if given at the wrong time, is not a blessing. It's poison. It must be earned, respected, and understood, or it will destroy what you love most." When she became ill, we spoke long into the nights about what would happen after her passing. Her greatest fear was not death itself, but the possibility that her legacy would cripple the very people she loved. So she left me a clear instruction. Do not reveal the inheritance to our son until he has faced the world on his own. Let him know hunger. Let him know love tested by hardship. Let him discover his own strength before you hand him mine. I promised her I would protect this secret, no matter the cost. A father and a son. My son grew up watching us work, but he never saw the full weight of what we had built. To him, we were comfortable, but ordinary. He did not know about the quiet bank accounts, the properties scattered across states, the shares accumulating in silence. He grew up with laughter in the house, dinners at the table, and a mother who never spoiled him with riches, only with love. She gave him what wealth could never buy: resilience, curiosity, empathy. And when she passed, he was devastated. We both were. For me, it was losing my other half. For him, it was losing the guide of his heart. But in her absence, I saw her lessons alive in him. He studied hard, worked jobs that paid too little, and learned to stand on his own 2 feet. He fell in love, not with luxury, but with a woman who shared his struggles. Together, they dreamed of a life they could build, even if that life was far from easy. The wedding. When he announced his marriage, my heart was both heavy and proud. Heavy because his mother would not be there to see the day. Proud because he had found what she always hoped he would, a partner who valued him for who he was, not for what he owned. Their wedding was simple. No grand halls, no glittering chandeliers, no orchestra swelling in the background. Just a modest venue, friends, family, and 2 young people who believed love was enough to face the world. And yet, in the corners of that hall, I could hear the whispers. Relatives who judged, friends who raised eyebrows. Is this all he can afford? She could have done better. How will they survive like this? I kept silent as I always had been. No one knew about the 25 million. No one knew that in my pocket, in the paper sealed away in a bank vault, lay a future that could silence all those doubts in an instant. But I did not speak, because love, if it cannot withstand whispers, cannot withstand the storms of life. You the burden of a secret. That night, as I watched them dance, awkward, clumsy, but glowing with joy, I felt the weight of my promise. The inheritance was not mine to give. Not yet. It belonged to their future, but only when they were ready. I imagined what would happen if I announced it right then and there. If I stood, lifted my glass, and told the crowd that my son was the heir to millions. The gasps, the envy, the sudden change in how people looked at him, his love, his marriage, his friendships, all would be tainted. No, I thought, not now. My silence was both shield and burden, shielding him from greed, but burdening me with the knowledge that every struggle he faced might be eased if only I broke my promise. A life between 2 worlds, and so we moved forward. They began their married life with nothing but hope and determination. I remained in the background, supportive but never interfering. They spoke of bills, of dreams too expensive, of nights when they had to choose between one need and another. I listened, offered advice, but never opened the vault of truth. At times, it broke me. A father's instinct is to protect, to provide. To sit quietly while your child suffers feels almost unnatural. And yet, I held fast to the words of my wife. Do not give until they are ready to receive. The stage is set. That is how the secret lived, silently, like a shadow in the corner of every family gathering, every holiday meal, every birthday candle blown out. To the world, my son was just another young man starting from scratch, struggling like millions of others. But to me, he was the future bearer of a fortune large enough to change lives. The question that haunted me every day was not if I would tell him, but when. Because one day, the silence would end. One day, the weight would be lifted. One day, the 25 million would no longer be a hidden burden, but a revealed gift. But until then, the story remained as it began, with a promise to a woman I loved, a secret worth millions, and a silence that defined everything. The wedding day finally arrived. The church bells rang, and the sound of music and laughter filled the air. Friends, relatives, neighbors, and colleagues gathered, all dressed in their best attire, eager to witness the union of my son and his bride. It was a day of love, joy, and new beginnings. But for me, it was also a day of heavy silence. From the very moment I walked into the reception hall, I could feel the eyes on me. Some were warm, filled with respect. Others were calculating, curious, and expectant. After all, I was the father of the groom. Tradition said I should give something grand, something symbolic, something that showed my devotion not only to my son, but also to his new wife and her family. And then came the whispers. "Do you think he'll give them a house?" someone murmured at the next table. "I heard he's well off. Maybe he'll hand them a fat envelope. Something 6 figures at least." Another voice responded. "I bet he's going to surprise everyone. That's what rich men do at weddings." Their words floated through the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Some whispered with admiration, others with envy. A few even spoke with thinly veiled judgment, as if the worth of a father's love could be measured only in dollars. But I remained silent. I smiled politely, clinked glasses when needed, offered toasts of health and happiness. But inside, my chest tightened with every passing moment. Because little did they know, I was sitting on a fortune that could silence every rumor, every judgment, every greedy speculation. $25 million. It would have been so easy. One announcement, one speech, one dramatic gesture, and all their whispers would vanish in an instant. I could have stood up, raised my glass, and said, "My son, my daughter-in-law, here is your future, secured by the love your mother left behind." The applause would have been deafening. People would have cheered, gasped, envied. But that wasn't the gift my son needed. Because gifts of money come and go. But the lessons hidden behind silence? Those last a lifetime. As the ceremony unfolded, I found myself pulled into a private storm. On one hand, I wanted to protect my son, to shield him from judgment and give him the freedom money can buy. On the other, I feared that revealing the truth now would corrupt the very foundation of his new marriage. I thought of my late wife, how careful she had been with her fortune, how she had always reminded me. Wealth is not just about numbers in a bank account. It's about responsibility, about timing, about knowing when to give and when to hold back. Her voice echoed in my mind that night, guiding me toward patience, toward silence. But silence is never easy, especially when others expect a spectacle. At one point during the dinner, my new in-laws approached me. They were polite, but their smiles carried weight. The bride's father clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You must be very proud today. This is a once-in-a-lifetime moment. I'm sure you've prepared something special for the young couple, yes?" His eyes searched mine, not with malice, but with curiosity. Yet beneath that curiosity, I sensed something else, a subtle expectation, maybe even pressure. I nodded slowly, raising my glass. "My gift is their happiness. That's all I could ever wish for." He chuckled, perhaps thinking I was joking. But when I didn't elaborate, his smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before he quickly masked it with laughter. The rest of the evening, I noticed how the relatives of the bride leaned closer together, whispering more frequently. I caught fragments of their conversations. "Strange. I thought he was wealthy." "Maybe it's just rumors. Or maybe he's saving it for himself." Every word stung, but I refused to let it show. Meanwhile, my son was glowing with happiness. He didn't care about gifts, money, or whispers. He was lost in the moment, dancing with his wife, laughing with his friends, hugging relatives. Watching him, I reminded myself why I chose this silence. Because I needed to see if his joy came from love, not wealth. And yet, the pressure kept building. Later that night, as the music slowed and the lights dimmed, a cousin approached me. He was bold, the kind who spoke without filters. With a sly grin, he leaned in and whispered, So, Uncle, when are you dropping the bombshell? The big surprise? We're all waiting for it. I stared at him, confused. What surprise? You know, he lowered his voice. The inheritance? The fortune? Everyone's been talking about it? Surely tonight's the night, right? I felt my heart skip a beat. How did he know? Who told him? Perhaps it had been a careless slip from someone, or maybe gossip had traveled faster than I thought. Either way, the fact that people already speculated about the inheritance made my silence even heavier. I forced a smile and shook my head. Not everything in life is about money. He laughed, thinking I was dodging the truth. But I knew he wouldn't stop talking about it later. At that moment, a wave of fear washed over me. My silence wasn't just protecting my son anymore. It was also protecting the memory of my wife, the integrity of her legacy. Because if people discovered the truth too soon, the fortune could attract the wrong kind of attention. Greed, envy, manipulation. So I chose to endure. I sat through the whispers, the sidelong glances, the raised eyebrows. I let them think what they wanted to think. I let them wonder, judge, even gossip about me being stingy or ordinary. Because in the end, what mattered was not their opinion, but the truth I carried in my heart. That night, as I watched my son and his bride leave the hall hand in hand, stepping into their new life together, I realized something important. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes, silence is the greatest strength a father can have. For in that silence, I wasn't just hiding a fortune. I was protecting my son's chance to build a life on love, not on money. And that, I believed, was worth more than any applause or admiration. But deep inside, I also knew this silence wouldn't last forever. One day, the truth would have to be revealed. And when that moment came, it would shake everything they thought they knew about me, about themselves, and about the foundation of their marriage. The wedding ended with laughter, hugs, and blessings. As the guests departed, I stood quietly by the door, watching my son and his new bride walk out into the night. Their smiles were wide, their hands tightly intertwined, their eyes shining with a love that seemed invincible. I wanted to believe that love alone would be enough. But life has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. The first apartment. A week after the wedding, they moved into a modest apartment on the edge of town. It was nothing fancy. 2 small rooms, a cramped kitchen, thin walls that carried every sound from the neighbors. The rent was manageable, but the space was tight, and the air carried the faint smell of old paint and damp wood. My son had always dreamed of giving his wife something better. A home with sunlight pouring through wide windows, a kitchen big enough for her to cook freely, maybe even a little garden where they could drink coffee together. But dreams, at least for now, had to be postponed. They furnished the apartment with second-hand furniture, an old sofa donated by a cousin, a dining table bought cheap at a flea market, curtains his wife sewed herself from discounted fabric. To anyone else, it might have looked bleak, but when I visited, I saw how they made it theirs. A small flower vase on the table, family photos on the walls, laughter echoing through the tiny rooms. They were happy, but happiness doesn't pay the bills. Financial struggles. My son had a stable job, but not a high-paying one. He worked long hours at a local firm, often coming home exhausted, his shirt damp with sweat and his eyes heavy. His wife, meanwhile, tried to contribute by working part-time, sometimes at a cafe, sometimes tutoring children in the neighborhood. Their combined income barely covered the rent, groceries, and basic needs. There was little left for luxuries and almost nothing for savings. I remember one evening when I stopped by unannounced. They were eating dinner together. Just rice, a bowl of stir-fried vegetables, and a small plate of fried eggs. It was simple, far simpler than what I was used to at home. When they noticed me, they quickly smiled, offered me a seat, and insisted I join. I could see the hesitation in their eyes. They hadn't cooked enough for 3. But they split the food without complaint, placing the larger portions in front of me. That night, as I left their apartment, my chest ached. I could have changed everything with a single signature, a single transfer of funds. I could have given them a house, a car, security. Instead, I walked away silently, telling myself this was necessary. They needed to grow together, to struggle together, to learn what love truly meant when money was scarce. The whisper of temptations. Not everyone saw their life with such compassion. Relatives sometimes dropped by and made careless comments. Such a small apartment for newlyweds? Don't you think you deserve better? Or, your father has money, doesn't he? Why doesn't he help you out? I watched my son's face tighten at those remarks. He always defended me. My father has already given me the greatest gift, his support and blessing. That's enough. His wife, too, never complained. She smiled through it all, cooking with creativity, stretching every dollar, turning the smallest of spaces into a home filled with warmth. But behind closed doors, I knew they sometimes argued. The stress of bills, the exhaustion of long workdays, the disappointment of delayed dreams, it all weighed on them. I heard from neighbors that voices sometimes rose late at night. I imagined my son frustrated over finances, his wife worried about the future. Yet by morning, they always emerged hand in hand, as though their love was stitched back together after every storm. Silent observations. I made it a habit to visit them once or twice a month. Each time, I observed quietly, never offering money, never hinting at the inheritance. One afternoon, I found them repairing a broken chair together. My son held the wood steady, while his wife hammered in the nails. They laughed when the hammer slipped, nearly smashing his thumb. Their teamwork, their laughter, their persistence. It reminded me of the early days of my own marriage. Another time, I watched his wife wake up at dawn to prepare his lunchbox before work. She tucked in rice, a boiled egg, some pickled vegetables, humble, but filled with care. I saw the way my son's eyes softened when he opened it during his lunch break. These were the small, invisible treasures of marriage. Not the kind money could buy, but the kind that grew in the soil of struggle. The breaking point. But life has limits. A year into their marriage, the rent increased. His wife's cafe job closed down. Suddenly, their already thin finances stretched to breaking. I could see the exhaustion etched deeper into their faces, the weight pressing harder on their shoulders. One evening, my son came to visit me alone. His usual cheerful tone was gone. He sat across from me, his hands clenched, his eyes clouded. "Dad," he began hesitantly, "do you think I've made a mistake? Getting married so young, trying to start a life without enough savings?" The question pierced me. I wanted to shout, "No, you haven't made a mistake. You've only been forced to walk a harder road because I've kept silent about the inheritance." But I bit my tongue. Instead, I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Every couple struggles at the beginning. What matters is that you face it together. Mistakes aren't measured by how much money you have, but by how much you're willing to fight for each other." He nodded slowly, tears brimming in his eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. My wife's voice haunted me again. Trust him. Trust her. Trust their love. So I did. I stayed silent once more. Small victories. Months later, things began to shift. His wife found another job, tutoring full-time. My son earned a small promotion at work. It wasn't much, but it was enough to breathe a little easier. They celebrated not with lavish dinners, but with small joys: an ice cream shared on the street, a second-hand couch they proudly bought, a short weekend trip to the countryside paid for with months of saving. Every victory, no matter how small, seemed enormous to them. And to me, watching from the sidelines, those victories meant more than millions, because they were earned, not given. My silent pride. 2 years passed. Their apartment was still modest, their lives still simple. But I saw how their love had deepened. I saw how they leaned on each other, how they learned patience, how they laughed through hardships and comforted each other in tears. And every time I looked at them, I knew my silence had been worth it. Because the $25 million I held in my hands could have built them a life of comfort. But comfort doesn't build character. Struggle does. And in their struggle, I saw the kind of marriage that could endure anything. Yet deep down, I also knew I couldn't keep silent forever. One day, the truth would have to be revealed. One day, they would need to know the gift their mother had left for them. But that day hadn't come yet, not until I was absolutely certain that their foundation was unshakable. And so, I waited. I watched, and I carried the weight of silence, knowing it was the heaviest, yet most precious gift I could ever give. 3 years had passed since the wedding. By now, my son and his wife had weathered storms that would have torn many couples apart. They had faced unpaid bills, sleepless nights, and endless sacrifices. Yet, each time I saw them, I noticed something remarkable. Their love had not weakened, it had strengthened. They weren't rich. They didn't drive fancy cars or live in a sprawling house, but they had something priceless: resilience. Every laugh they shared, every tear they wiped from each other's faces, every small victory, they had built a life that money could never buy. It was then I knew. The time had finally come. The decision. I remember the night clearly. I sat in my study, staring at the old wooden box that contained the documents of my wife's estate: bank statements, investment records, deeds, proof of a fortune worth $25 million. For years, I had guarded this secret like a treasure locked in a vault. But now, I felt her voice urging me. It's time. They are ready. My heart pounded with both fear and anticipation. I rehearsed the words I might say. How could I explain the silence? Would they feel betrayed, angry, or would they understand? I decided to take the risk. The dinner invitation. The following weekend, I invited them over for dinner. My son arrived with his wife, both carrying small gifts: freshly baked bread, a bottle of wine. They smiled warmly as they stepped into the house, filling it with the energy of youth and love. Dinner was simple but comforting: roasted chicken, potatoes, salad. We ate, we laughed, we reminisced about old memories. Yet, beneath the laughter, my chest tightened with the weight of what I was about to do. Finally, when the plates were cleared, I excused myself and returned with the wooden box. I set it gently on the table between us. My son looked at me, puzzled. His wife tilted her head curiously. "Dad?" he asked. "What's this?" I took a deep breath. My hands trembled as I placed the key on the table. "This," I began slowly, "is something I've kept from you, something your mother left behind." Their expressions shifted: confusion, curiosity, maybe even a flicker of worry. The revelation. I unlocked the box and opened it, revealing the neatly stacked documents inside. Their eyes widened as they glanced at the words: bank accounts, real estate deeds, investment portfolios. My voice shook, but I pressed on. "When your mother passed away, she didn't just leave memories, she left a fortune. $25 million. The room fell into stunned silence. My son's fork slipped from his hand and clattered onto the table. His wife covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with disbelief. 25 million? My son finally whispered, his voice breaking. I nodded. Yes, it's been here, waiting, all this time. Tears welled in his eyes. His wife stared at me, speechless. But why didn't you tell us? My son finally asked, his voice trembling between shock and hurt. The explanation, that was the moment I had dreaded most. I leaned forward, my gaze fixed on him. Because, my son, money is not just a blessing. It's a test. If I had given it to you on your wedding day, you might never have known the weight of struggle, the value of sacrifice. I needed to see if your marriage was built on love or on greed. I needed to know if you could stand together with nothing before I gave you everything. His eyes searched mine, shining with unshed tears. His wife clasped his hand tightly as if anchoring him in the storm. Do you know how many nights we cried over bills? He asked softly. How many times we worried about the future? Yes, I whispered. I saw it, I heard it, and it broke me every time. But I also saw how you held each other, how you fought for each other. That's when I knew you were ready. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. For a moment, I feared I had lost them, that they would resent me for withholding, for watching them struggle while holding the key to ease their pain. But then, his wife spoke. Her voice was gentle, trembling, but filled with something deeper than anger. Your silence? It hurt, yes, but it also shaped us. We learned to survive together. We learned that our love is stronger than money. And maybe that was the gift all along. Her words cracked the dam. My son buried his face in his hands, sobbing openly. I reached across the table, placing my hand on his shoulder. I did it for you, I said, tears streaming down my face. For her memory, for the kind of life she wanted you to have, not one bought by wealth, but one built by love. Vimy embraced. He looked up, his eyes red but filled with something I hadn't seen in years, understanding. Slowly he rose from his chair, walked around the table, and pulled me into his arms. Thank you, Dad, he whispered hoarsely, not for the money, but for believing in us. His wife joined the embrace, wrapping her arms around both of us. For the first time since her passing, I felt my late wife's presence in the room, not as grief, but as love surrounding us, binding us together. The aftermath. That night, we talked for hours. We went through the documents together. I explained how the inheritance worked, how his mother had carefully built it, how she wanted it to secure his future. But more than that, we talked about the journey, the years of silence, the lessons learned, the strength discovered. My son confessed that while the struggles had been painful, they had also been formative. If we had started with millions, he said, maybe we wouldn't have learned to fight for each other. Maybe we wouldn't have known the true meaning of partnership. His wife agreed, adding softly, we know now that money can make life easier, but it's love that makes life worth living. Their words filled me with peace. For the first time, I felt the weight of silence lift from my shoulders. The secret was no longer mine to bear. It belonged to them now, to cherish, to protect, to honor. The lesson. As the night drew to a close, I gave them one final piece of advice. Remember, this money is powerful. It can open doors, change lives, build dreams, but it can also destroy if you let it control you. Promise me you'll use it wisely. Promise me you'll let it serve your love, not replace it. They nodded, their eyes solemn, their hands clasped together. And in that moment, I knew my wife's legacy was safe. Not just the money, but the values she cherished. Because my son and his wife had passed the test. They had proven that their marriage was unshakable, forged not in wealth, but in love. And now, with the inheritance revealed, they were ready for the future, together. Every story, no matter how heavy with sorrow or brightened with joy, eventually reaches its ending. But for us, that evening was not an ending at all. It was a beginning. The revelation of the $25 million inheritance was not just about wealth. It was about love, patience, sacrifice, and the invisible bonds that tie one generation to the next. From silence to light for years, this house was filled with silence. Silence at the dinner table when bills piled up. Silence when dreams had to be postponed because money ran short. Silence when my son and his wife struggled to keep their marriage alive under the weight of financial hardship. I carried the secret of his mother's legacy like a stone on my chest. There were nights I wanted to break it, to relieve him of his suffering by telling him the truth. But each time, I stopped myself. I asked, if I hand him wealth before he understands struggle, will it be a gift or a curse? That silence, that waiting, was not cruelty. It was a lesson. Darkness, I realized, is sometimes the only way one can truly understand the value of light. Love, stronger than wealth money, has an odd power over people. It builds and destroys. It unites and divides. I have seen families torn apart by inheritance. Brothers who once played together as children suddenly became enemies over numbers on a page. But my son and his wife were different. Before a single dollar was placed in their hands, they had walked through fire together. They knew what it meant to split a single piece of bread, to count coins for rent, to face the shame of whispers at their wedding. They did not just survive hardship, they chose each other in the middle of it. That choice mattered more than any amount of money. So when the $25 million finally entered their lives, I did not fear greed or arrogance. I knew their foundation had already been tested. Their wealth would not own them. Instead, they would use it as a tool, because their true treasure was already built in the furnace of struggle, their love. A message from the departed. That night, as I embraced them after revealing the secret, I felt her presence, my late wife, his mother. It was as if she whispered, "You did right. Our son is ready." She was the one who insisted on this path. She believed in resilience, in the strength that only trials could forge. She left behind more than money. She left behind a philosophy. Her legacy was not written in numbers, but in values. In her eyes, wealth was not meant to make life easy. It was meant to make life purposeful. She wanted our son to learn responsibility first, so that when the time came, he would not drown in abundance. That night, I knew she was watching, and I knew she was proud. The power of waiting. If there is one lesson this story offers, it is that sometimes love does not mean giving immediately. It means waiting. To give them the money on their wedding day would have been simple. It would have saved them years of struggle. But what would have been lost? The sleepless nights that taught them resilience. The hunger that taught them empathy. The whispered doubts that taught them loyalty. Waiting carved character into their hearts. Waiting turned tears into diamonds. Waiting transformed pain into strength. And when the truth was finally revealed, the gift was not just the inheritance itself. It was the knowledge that they had earned it through endurance. A father's words, That evening, I sat them down and said, "Money is a double-edged sword. It can build empires, or it can shatter families. It can heal, or it can corrupt. Only when love and responsibility guide you will wealth be a blessing. Never let numbers replace affection. Never let luxury silence kindness. This fortune will mean nothing if you forget the value of sacrifice." They both nodded, eyes wet, hands clasped together. In that moment, I knew they understood, and I believed their promise. A new beginning. After that night, life changed, not because of expensive cars or mansions, but because of the relief that followed. They could finally breathe without the weight of survival pressing down on them. But more importantly, they chose to use the inheritance with meaning. They bought a modest home filled with warmth. They created a scholarship fund in my wife's name. They invested in projects that lifted struggling families, just as they themselves had once struggled. Every time I watched them use money as a force for good, I felt my heart lighten. The legacy had not been wasted. The wealth was no longer just a number. It had become an extension of her love, carried forward through them. Ending, or beginning. As I recount this story, I do not wish for anyone to see it merely as a tale of $25 million. That number is only a symbol. The true wealth lies in the journey, the hunger, the whispers, the endurance, the unwavering choice to love despite it all. If you are reading this now, perhaps you too have known hardship. Perhaps you've faced debts or loneliness, or moments when the future seemed impossible. If so, I hope you see what my son and his wife discovered. That struggle is not punishment, it is preparation. The darkest nights are often the prelude to the brightest mornings. For them, the inheritance was not an ending, it was a reminder that love is stronger than poverty, that patience gives birth to strength, that silence can speak the loudest words of love. And for me, as a father, the greatest joy was not handing them 25 million. It was watching them stand together, unbroken, ready to carry forward the legacy of the woman who gave them everything, even in her absence. Because in the end, money fades, possessions crumble, and names are forgotten. But love, sacrifice, and the lessons carved by hardship, those live forever.